sunshine. We'll understand it all by and by. When death has come and taken our loved ones, it leaves our home so lonely and drear. Then do we wonder why others prosper, living so wicked year after year. Farther along we'll know all about it. Farther along we'll understand why. Cheer up, my brother, live in the sunshine. We'll understand it all by and by. When we see Jesus coming in glory, when he comes from his home in the sky, then we shall meet him in that bright mansion. We'll understand it all by and by. Farther along we'll know all about it. Farther along we'll understand why. Cheer up, my brother, live in the sunshine. We'll understand it all by and by. Tempted and tried, we're oft made to wonder why it should be thus all the day long, while there are others living about us, never molested, going the wrong. Farther along we'll know all about it. Farther along we'll understand why. Cheer up, my brother, live in the sunshine. We'll understand it all by and by. When death has come and taken our loved ones, it leaves our home so lonely and drear. Then do we wonder why others prosper, living so wicked year after year. Farther along we'll know all about it. Farther along we'll understand why. Cheer up, my brother, live in the sunshine. We'll understand it all by and by. When we see Jesus coming in glory, when he comes from his home in the sky, then we shall meet him in that bright mansion. We'll understand it all by and by. Farther along we'll know all about it. Farther along we'll understand why. Cheer up, my brother, live in the sunshine. We'll understand it all by and by. Tempted and tried, we're oft made to wonder why it should be thus all the day.
Well, you know, you get Exodus 20, and you're literally on the mountain, right? The Ten Commandments are given, and I've spent, I don't know what it was, the last 3-4 weeks. We had a couple of breaks in there, weeks where I was gone and no class, so it seemed like a lot longer. But it's not that I was delaying getting to the second half of the book of Exodus. There's good stuff in the second half, but I'm not going to lie to you and say that it's just as exciting and even better than the first half, first 20 chapters. I'm not going to tell you that. It can be a little tedious. And so what we're going to do is probably going to go through the end of March, and we'll finish the book. We will be doing a lot more condensing and summarizing. And so let's look at this here. Let's see here. Let me see if this monitor went. All right, yeah, this. Well, I got nothing there, guys, so if you want to move that or not. Let's see here. There we go. Ask and ye shall receive. All right. Well, let's go back. Boy, this thing is on a delay today. Okay. So let's look at this. We're going to kind of summarize this section in 20 through 23, various laws, and then you kind of see there laws about the Sabbath, the covenants confirmed, the tabernacle, of course, the pattern that God gives, and then the golden calf. After the golden calf, incidentally, the covenant will be renewed, and that's how God will respond. And then there's a section here in 25 through 31 that's also paralleled in 35 through 40, and so we won't be spending, because there's some similarity there. It's a similar material, and so we'll kind of get it in that section. And then, of course, the book ends with in the tabernacle, God, where He's always wanted to be, is with His people. God dwelling with His people. All right, so in this section here, 20 through 23, there's kind of some areas of life that, again, God is building a what? A nation, a people. The foundation was the Ten Commandments, right? I mean, that is the core foundation. And so that's what we're going to see. And now we're going to have these additional commands and instructions that He's going to give in areas of life. And the first one, the first post-Ten Commandment law, deals with worship or altars. Now, what's an altar? What I guess would be a good definition, or just what was altars used for? What offerings? What? Presentation, okay. Sacrifice, yeah. Place of worship, right? It's a holy place. It's a sacred place. And so think about what God is doing. The first post Ten Commandment law, there in 20 and beginning in verse 22, you have seen for yourselves, verse 22, that I have spoken to you from heaven. Do not make any idols to be alongside me. That's a repeat of what? What we've already seen in the Ten Commandments. Don't make for yourself gods or silver or gods of gold. Make an altar of earth for me and sacrifice on it your burnt offerings and fellowship offerings and sheep and goats and cattle. And wherever I cause my name to be honored, I will come to you and bless you. If you make an altar of stones for me, do not build it with dressed stones. So he gives them some more details there. First thing out of the Ten Commandments is worship. Anything strike you with that, or kind of why that might be, the significance of that, importance of that? Anything that, why not launch into some more? All right, now let me tell you about this, more about on this theft and worship.
That's our relationship
And he doesn't even, start into all right, now get to living it this way. I mean, it's just the centering their lives after he's given them these laws that are govern their lives is you establish a place of worship for me. It is that important. Worship, now I understand you can have times of devotion and praise and worship, and I understand the idea and the concept, which I believe in, that in the larger sense, everything we do is for glory and honor and praise and worship to God our whole lives. I believe that. But I'm talking about those specific moments where God calls us to worship Him, okay? We're only here for what? If you come to Bible class, you get 45 more minutes on your time card that you get to punch in, a little bit, I guess. I'm teasing. But, we're only, we don't do Sunday night worship anymore. We have small groups we're starting up. We're excited. But, it's just a few minutes out of the week. An hour or two out of the whole week, right? But how centering is it in our lives? Everything we're going to do this week, it's shaped and formed out of what we're focusing on this morning, which is who? God, right? That we are in a relationship with God. We're in submission to God. Our lives are devoted to God. And the things that we do specifically, singing, taking the Lord's Supper, all those things we know are going to, the direction that we're going to go this week. It's going to come out of that. The songs we sing, the prayers. How many times have something what's amazing is I have preached sermons and I have said one small little point, I call them little sub points, little almost throwaway points, just little interesting nuggets. Sometimes I'll share with you something that comes out of the study, and I just want to share it. It's really not supporting my larger point that I'm making, but it's just kind of an incidental. And I've had you folks, you members of the church over the years have come out when I've preached on something and said, later on, now Robert, I've been thinking about that all, late Wednesday or next Sunday, and I'm going, it was just a little throwaway point. 2 seconds out of my sermon, and yet it made a what? Sometimes someone has said something or you've read something, what? And it just stays with you, what, the whole week? How significant the worship of God's people. Do you remember Hebrews chapter 12? We don't have time to look at it. But he says, we've come not to the mountain of Sinai. He says we've come to a kingdom that cannot be shaken. Remember he says where innumerable angels are. And do you remember how Hebrews 12 ends? Therefore let us worship in fear and reverence. I know because we do it so frequently, that is every week, it's easy to just, worship, Sunday, the Lord's Day. But for God's people, it's always been the very center of their lives. And so now, I understand, God's people are also going to go to the, well, as long as I get the worship right and come in and worship God, then I can live however I want and ignore the Ten Commandments. Now we know what God thinks about that, right? Do all the worship you want, and if you don't live it, that's not going to get you anywhere. But the significance of these altars and what they're to do. All right, then you get into chapter 21, and it's going to deal with slaves and slavery, is what we find here in this section. These are sections of the Old Testament, along with Ephesians chapter 6 and Colossians 3. Slaves, be subject to your masters. You know what I'm talking about. This passage, this section, where secular, modern minds who do not read the Scriptures, who do not, this really bothers them. And the argument has been, one of the arguments is, especially in the New Testament, but it's the same here in the Old Testament, why doesn't God condemn? Why does he acknowledge? Why does he sanction, seemingly give his approval? Why does he regulate, whatever you want to describe? Why doesn't he condemn and say, don't even think about practicing any form of slavery? I know it's cold winter morning, but I promise you, if you're going to run up against someone who does not believe in the Scriptures and even has some angst and hostility against the Scriptures, you're going to run up against this one, aren't you? And, sometimes we've made it worse by kind of doing the, have you ever done that? You've seen that with your kids where they act like they play dumb? I don't know. I don't know what you're talking about. The Bible talks about slavery? Yeah, when Paul tells the slaves to obey their masters, even the ones that beat them, that's in there, isn't it? We can do this, right? We can do this. So let's not ignore it, right? And so, any thoughts on that? Anything jump out at you? At least obviously I got a few thoughts, but okay. Right. Yeah. Of course, let me say this. One of the problems we face in these discussions is our minds immediately go to 17th, 18th century slavery in the South in America, right? That's one of the problems. Now, it doesn't solve the whole, don't think you can just go there and say, well, the slavery in the Bible was nothing at all connected to that kind. That was a different kind of slavery. And I admit, it was a different kind in a lot of ways. But it doesn't absolve the whole, you can't just wave it with a hand and say, well, but we acknowledge that our minds have a hard time because we only think what? American 17th, 18th century slavery in the South. And but the still of kind of owning property, people, and kind of having that kind of control over them, that it still bothers people. So why not God just wipe his hands of all of it here at the beginning? Hey, Robert. Yes. Sure.
God's people. So I think God knows that it exists, so he talks about it.
Yeah.
Hey, if this is going to happen, there are only going to be people that
Yeah.
plunder people.
And I think Jeff, you're on the right track. What God is really doing is he's shaping how his people are going to act when it comes to, because the nations around Israel are going to practice what? Slavery. We get to the first century, and historians tell us over half the population of Rome was slaves. Now, again, we can talk about the difference, more of an indentured servitude versus the, rounding up African Americans in Africa and on slave trade ships and bringing them over here, and people in our country, good God-fearing people, treated them as what does it say in the Constitution? A third of what are they? 3/4 of what is it? 5/8. Yeah. We understand that, but what you have is, we live in a broken world. God is going to acknowledge that. God certainly has the power to just decimate it, but we're talking about human hearts here. And this is an institution that's old and ancient. And what the Lord is doing in this section, when you read the law, is he's restoring the dignity of a person. Now, let me read a little bit here from a commentary that I thought. The Bible does not prohibit slavery in an absolute form. We've got to acknowledge that. Don't say that to someone. The Bible doesn't. No. The Bible does not abolish slavery in its absolute form. Exodus 21:16 and following prescribes the death penalty for those who enslave others, for those who buy the kidnapped victims of such slave traders. Incidentally, remember in 1 Timothy 6, Paul will condemn kidnappers, won't he? He does. And that's in the context of the slave trade. of slaves. Paul affirms this as well in his list of denunciations. If a master struck a slave and knocked out a tooth or blinded an eye, the slave went free. Exodus 21, 26, 27. If a master beat a slave to death, it was commanded the master be punished. Exodus 21, 20. Furthermore, the law of Jubilee. Oh, you remember the law of Jubilee? On the 7th year, what? They go free. And not only that, they don't just go free, they are returned to their what? Their land. The recognition that these are people. Now again, most of the ancient slavery, a good chunk of it, was what we would call often indentured servitude. What's that mean? Yeah, I can't pay my bills. Now, what do we do in America? We don't pay our bills. We just say what? Come get my house, right? We had a guy, where was he? In Shawnee, I can't remember, Maggie, where we were at. And a guy, they were coming after his truck. What do they call those guys? The repo. I mean, he was peeking. He was, and I'm out there like, and he goes, does this guy live? Does he work? And I kind of played a little dumb. I mean, he was a good old boy. I didn't want to, But that's what we do. Now, I understand you get in major debt. You can get yourself, but in ancient times, they didn't have what we have, right? That luxury. They could come what? They come get you. They come get your family, your children, your wife, and so what often people would do would what? Voluntarily give themselves to another in indentured slavery. I'm paying a debt. And it's not equivalent to employer-employee, right? It's close. It's close. But not quite. Not quite. It has similarity. It has similarity. Now, we know in those contexts, they could be harsh. You've got a major debt. You don't have, and so they could abuse. And so what is God doing in this? He's reshaping. He's regulating. He's getting his people to see how they value, how they see people. I've heard it a long time ago, and I'm sure this guy got it from someone who got it from, but there's only two ways to see people, really, from biblical. They're made in God's image, and there's someone that Christ died for, right? That's how you see every person. I don't care what they do, what they're like, how bad, how good, how rich, how poor, how dirty, how clean. You see everybody in what? In two lights. God made them in what? His image. And Christ what? Died for them. Now that'll change how you see people. Now we know we're not getting Christ died for you in Exodus, at least directly. But it's still the concept here is here. And so I think when you see these passages, and as well as the New Testament, what does Paul do with any brutal form of masters with their slaves? What does Paul say to those Christians? Don't what? Hello? You've read it. What's he tell those Christian masters? Treat them bad? Slap them around? What's Paul tell them? You treat your what? You slaves in the light of Christ. And don't forget you have a what? You have a master. Now slaves, work honorably, work hard. Well, what if they're not always fair? Doesn't matter. Now again, they didn't have a constitution, they didn't have a Bill of Rights, they didn't have a government system like we do, so we understand some of those. But the point is God regulates, God redefines, and so in a way that it would be hard to practice what we would call cruel, evil, abuse of forms like the slavery, the way the New Testament and the Old Testament even teaches it. And so I think that's just, you kind of have to just kind of wade through this section of the Bible, but be careful. Don't overstate, don't play dumb. Slavery? Oh, I don't know what you're talking about. I didn't know Paul talks about So acknowledge it, but also the difference, of course, what we see in American history and slavery in the South. There is some differences there that we also have to see. Okay, let me see here. Restitution, 21 through 23, or through 22. So, you ever notice when you live in community and neighborhoods, neighbors, people get together, live in close proximity, what has a tendency to happen sometimes when you interact or when you live amongst each other? You got a house, you got a property, you got a car, you got a tree that's big and hangs over somebody's fence. I mean, what tends to happen? Disputes. Well, disputes, but this stuff happens. Stuff gets broken. Accidents. How does a society deal with those things? Well, I mean, the human heart is, you got to watch it, because the tendency can be what? Over what? You ever seen a neighbor over what? Overreact? Your car has gotten on my grass and you ever seen that? And they just blow up. I mean, they want to call the police and they want to take you to small claims court. And I mean, you're, okay, I'm sorry do you want me to get a little strip of sod and you know? So, I mean, we laugh at that, but how real is that? I mean, has it gotten violent? It can get violent. And so, again, we read over these sections, and I've done some of this, I call it speed reading sometimes in the Bible. When you do Bible, I'm going to talk about Bible reading this morning in my sermon as a habit to connect with God. You can get in these sections and kind of just, okay, and God, Moses told them pay 2/3, okay, and then you blow through the, you know, you just kind of, you don't really read it. Because you go, all right, it's dealing with laws of restitution, right? What does that really have to do with my life? I don't know. Some of you had to deal with that in your lives. And so what's God doing here? He's establishing these guidelines, these principles. Do what's right. If you've got a hole and your neighbor's oxen falls in it and breaks its leg and dies, you have a responsibility, the one who what? Had that hole, to do what? Make it right. You know, we've had these conversations with our kids. Did you ever have those conversations with your kids and say, what you do until you're 18, I am legally what? Responsible. Oh, it wasn't no big deal. We just went through their yard. We were just in their tree, and we, you know, and we're going what? I'm liable. You break, you burn. I remember one of the worst whippings my brother Rich got. I mean, I got some bad ones too, but I mean, he's playing with fire, and they'd been warned, and you know, it started up a little grass fire, and I mean, that guy. Back then, you know, you could kind of get away. I don't know if he had my brother by the, but there was my dad's door. And he'd already been warned about it. And so my dad already knew that there had been and I mean, what? Playing with fire in someone's yard? Right, but I mean, when you're what, 10, 11, you don't, right. But what? How important is that? That we live in a society that God's people are shaped by, if you wrong someone, if you hurt and destroy someone's, you are what? You're responsible. I mean, how relevant is that today in our culture? It seems like it, or lacking at times. I mean, are people more responsible? For some of you that's lived a lot, you know, we've lived longer, are you seeing more people take responsibility for their actions? No. They will what? They'll deny, they'll lie. Wasn't my fault. You know? You shouldn't have built your driveway. That tree shouldn't have been, you know, or whatever whatever. They just, and so this is the element of doing what's right when you've wronged your neighbor. Accidents, and so I remember we were watching the Andy Griffith Show. I don't know, every now and then we'll rewatch some of the shows and the old shows. We had Paramount Plus. I don't know how we got it. I guess we signed it up for it. All these streaming channels now, you're like, how did we get Peacock? How did we get, and I signed up gave my email. I don't know. You just think how we get these channels, but Paramount, the CBS, and of course the Andy Griffith Show, it was made by CBS, and so we were watching some of them, and it had the episode where Opie's doing the little fire, the keeper of the candle flame with the secret group, and they don't burn down the guy's barn. He was making steel. He had steel, making liquor. But the point, Andy thought, because Opie did have the match or the candle, and he had been out at his barn, had at his property the day before. Andy thought, what? I've got to pay for this. And you remember he's out there. All right, how much for the corn feed and how much for the? And the guy's like, well, there was also my tools in there. And Andy's like, all right. But Andy told Opie, I've got to pay. I've got to pay for that. And how many parents now go out of their way to make sure their kid will not have to pay? Now, I mean, they'll go out of their way if their kid has been in the wrong. They'll do everything they can to make sure their child is not held accountable. They don't want to flunk. They don't want to get the F. They don't want to be kicked off the team. They don't want to be, so I know we read these sections of the Bible and we go, I think I'll just speed read. I have a Hebrew servant, blah, 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 and I'll get on to the Moses in the cleft of the rock with God and all that. But these are important. These are real important. You get just the social justice. That's what the NIV heading is. I don't know if it's quite the same as some of the claims that we hear today. But it is how to deal with a neighbor. Don't bear false witness. Do what's right. Be fair. Be just. And this is a big part of what the minor prophets will condemn when they come on the scene later on. The people are not being just. Sexual laws are in this section. I mentioned I mentioned when I talked about adultery. It's expanded upon in this section a little bit more. And you can read the details. But God is building the whole Jewish system from the ground up. Do you see that? How important this is and vital this is? And so a legal system that's based upon justice, fairness, doing what's right. An eye for an eye. I know we hear that sometimes out of context, but it is judicial restraint. That someone wrongs you, you're entitled to justice, but, you don't get to kill them if they hurt your eye, right? And so there's what God is doing in that regard is very, very important here. And then just the Sabbath and festival laws, you read that on your own. It's just, we've talked a little bit about Sabbath. Okay, just some general lessons here. Look at Exodus 21. Let me come back to this. Look how it begins there in verse 1. These are the laws. Mespatim is the Hebrew word. Rulings, judgments, guided decisions. If you're an Israelite judge, you don't get to make it up, do you, as you go along? Now, this is not what was things have changed now. Remember what was Moses doing back yonder when, Jethro showed up and observed? Moses was sitting what? And he was making all kinds of judgments on the people, settling disputes. And remember, Jethro gave him good advice about have some appointed men that are trusted among the people and kind of these lower courts, and you handle the big stuff. But what God says here is you don't get to make it up. These are the guided judgments, rulings, commands of God in how you deal. You don't get to define what's fair in society. How hard are we having trouble with that today? Can we even agree on, seemingly, what's fair anymore? It's chaos. And so God is God's eliminating that. He says, here is the rulings, the judgments. Your neighbor, his ox, you give him money, you make right, you restore, you provide another ox, all these different things. This is, I think, real significant here in this regard. You also, I think, see Israel is holy but imperfect. God knows His people are going to what? He gives all these commands, the 10 Commandments. He knows they're going to what? They're going to break them. We're going to mess up. We're going to, it's kind of like sometimes, maybe like a child, maybe with a parent or a teacher or a coach, you ever had that where a child or someone in a position of authority or leadership and has a young person, and they're like, they're saying, they're on the look on their face, they're so disappointed, the child or the student or the player. And you may remember feeling that way. You've let your parent down, you've let your coach down, you've let your teacher down, and did you ever have that did you as a parent or a teacher or coach, if you were in a position like that, did you ever kind of have to just put your arm around them and say, I've messed up too in my life. Maybe someone at work, do you ever have a boss that instead of just blowing up and embarrassing you and chewing you out real bad, kind of just pulled you aside and said, I understand. Been there, done that. Now, of course, let's learn from it, right? But Israel is not perfect. And God has laws. But He understands that we're going to sin. We do not have permission to sin. But boy, we've got forgiveness when we do. I love what 1 John says. If anyone sins, why am I laughing about that? If anyone sins, we have an advocate, what? With the Father. If anyone sins, yeah, John, we're going to sin. And so God knows that. Matter of fact, He said what earlier in the chapter? If you say you have no what? Sin. You make God a liar. You deceive yourself. We talked a little bit about that last week, I think, or I don't know, one of the weeks I was teaching something. We talked about self-deception. So Israel is going to mess up. How about this one? The Lord is to be the priority for Israel. The Lord is to be the priority for Israel. What did we go back and say? The very first post-10 Commandment law was what? The establishment of what? Of worship. Worship is to be central. It's to govern. It's to guide our lives. What are the high places in my life? Ooh, that's a good question, huh? What are the altars that I've built in my life? Is it money? Is it job? Is it career? Is it whatever it might be? What's the priorities in my life? Can you see them in our lives? I mean, is it evident when we really look closely at our lives? Can we see the priorities? I think so. Yeah, Jeff?
Yeah, that's the hardest thing with kids is, if you were raised in the church, there's really no option. I remember, when I was a kid, none sports, no activity, nothing came before worship. I was in Cub Scouts, something I was 10, and I remember they only did it on Saturdays, and I never could go. And finally I begged my dad. He was there
it definitely reveals our heart, our priorities in our lives. How about the sanctity of human life? I mean, all life is what? Valuable, is precious, is a gift from God. We talked about that when we talked about thou shalt not murder. It's not kill, because there are times when God does regulate the taking of life, but the malicious, deliberately taking of another life, we have no right to that. We just, it's God, the one who gives life. And so, you know, and I want you to think about this. Because I know we go to, you know, and I believe, you know, we go to places like abortion immediately, and I'm all for saying absolutely that's the taking of life, the value of life, the sanctity of life. So I'm for that as far as, you know, standing. But what does the sanctity of life look beyond that? Like, think about what someone does to someone, the sanctity of life, when you go and steal from someone's life. What are you doing to their life? You ever seen that devastate somebody's life? You ever seen someone's business get just crushed because of, I mean, what does it look like, you know, outside the womb, okay? The sanctity of life. Oh, that's just their fence. That's just their property. That's just their tree. That's just their car. You know, if someone's flipping about that. No, that's their what? In a lot of ways, their livelihood, their lively, and I understand our life is not our possessions, but I eat, I work, people survive. And in ancient times, you can imagine if you had an ox, and that was your only ox to plow, I mean, what happens if you lose your ox? Right? And so, what does the sanctity of life look outside that? You know, what's that look in regard to health and safety and other aspects of life? You know, education. Do you know where the gospel has always went historically? What have they often established? Schools of education. Why? Because isn't part of education the value of a life? Hello? Do we just tell kids, you don't have to go to school, just roam the streets? Right? No. We know how important it is. And so, you know, yes, abortion, yes, those sort of big hot button topics, but we ought to care just as much outside the womb for that life as we do in the womb. And so all of this is showing the sanctity of life, the dignity of life. Punishment fits the crime, right? It ought to fit the crime, the dignity and the value. Compensation, where there's restitution can be made. It's all a part of this. A deterrence. If I commit this, if this happens, even if it's accident, I'm going to be held what? Responsible, accountable. Do you think we've lost that in society? We got some teachers in here. You think we've lost that in the schools and the homes? It's not the school's fault. The schools are one arm, two arms behind their back now. They can't, you know, kid can punch and yell and cuss out and break anything they want, and there's nothing they can really do anymore. Yeah. But have we lost that deterrence? I think so. Worst thing, you know, when you hear a kid say, you know, about, you know, I don't care. Tell my parent. Tell my whatever. They don't, you know, they don't have. And so this is a deterrent we see. It prevents abuse, especially with the judicial system. I mean, God's going to have a lot to say about rulers and judges and leaders who don't fulfill the law. That's going to be, and so whether you are a judge, just an Israelite, just regular Israelite working, or whether you're a master or a slave, all of this is governing society, forming and shaping a nation. And the same is true in the New Testament with the church. The laws, the commandments of God. You're going to get over to Deuteronomy. Listen to what Deuteronomy will say about God's commands. Choose them, I'm paraphrasing, live by them, for they are your life. Think about that. All this stuff we've kind of, restitution and your oxen, and the tree falls over and all this stuff that we can kind of skim over. Later on, it's going to be summarized. Obey these commands, follow these commands, live by these commands because they are your life. What's happening to our society? Life is, and so this will obviously regulate, function the kingdom of God in the New Testament under Christ and the Holy Spirit. So, because you see a lot of similarities in the New Testament with some of this language. All right, well, we will pick up with, I know, another exciting section in the laws next time.